Increasing your productivity means getting more work done in the same amount of time. One really great way to do that in AutoCAD is by using dimension substyles in order to control your dimensions so that you don't have to go in and create overrides over and over again. One of the easiest and most effective ways of increasing your productivity while using AutoCAD is to set up and use dimension styles and substyles. Now, I already have a dimension style in this drawing which controls all of the dimensions and what they look like. For example, it tells it how big the text should be, how big the arrowheads should be, how big the gaps should be, all that kind of stuff. But if I come in here and add an angular dimension, for example, between this center line and this center line, notice that in this case, my dimension, the number itself, is aligned with that arc, which is fine. In most situations, it's not going to cause a problem, but some people might want that number to be horizontal instead of at some angle. But my dimension style says that my numbers should always be aligned with my dimension line. So if that's something that you're going to go in and want to make an override for, instead of using the override command over and over and over again, what you can do is you can simply create a dimension substyle. To create a dimension substyle, you will first launch your dimension style manager and choose the dimension the dimension style you want to create a substyle of. You'll come over here and choose new, and it'll say copy of mechanical, and start with mechanical, and then down here at the bottom say use for all dimensions. Now, I don't want to use it for all dimensions. I just want to add a substyle for angular dimensions. So I'll drop that list down and I will choose angular dimensions. Notice now it says it's using for angular dimensions, and it's grayed out now copy of mechanical. So it's going to actually just create a substyle. I can choose continue, and then in this I can go to my text tab and I can say I want that text just to be horizontal, choose OK, and now notice that it's created my dimension style here and the substyle. And if I click on mechanical, it shows me how the settings should look for all of my mechanical dimensions. If I click on my substyle, it shows me what they're supposed to look like there. I can choose close, and it automatically updates that angular dimension so that it reflects the changes. If it does not update it for some reason, you can use the update dimension tool right here and it will update it for you. Now, another place that's common to do overrides is on a tolerance. Now, you never want to add a tolerance to every dimension on a page. That would be the wrong thing to do. Usually in the title block or somewhere in the notes, there's going to be a note that says tolerance is to a specific number unless otherwise indicated. So I would know that because this is to 2 decimal points, it probably has a 10,000th tolerance. So the smallest it could be would be 0.49, and the largest it could be would be 0.51. That's a common tolerance that would be stated in a title block. But if I want this to have an even closer tolerance, I can set that up with an override. So if I want to set up an override on this dimension, for example, you'll just simply choose the one dimension that you want to add the tolerance to, use your Change Properties dialog box, scroll all the way down to the bottom down here, and you'll see that there's an option for tolerance display. Right now it says none. I'll simply change that from none to, in this case, I'm going to use limits. Now what the limits does is it says, hey, the smallest the dimension can be is this lower number, the largest this dimension can be is the larger number. Well, because I'm increasing my tolerance or decreasing my tolerance, I also need to come in here and change my tolerance precision. So I'm going to allow that now to have 3 places, all right? But I want my tolerance limit lower, okay? This is as small as it can be. If I want it to be 1,000th of an inch smaller, I'm going to type 0.001. And notice that it automatically subtracts 1,000th of an inch from that lower limit, okay? If I want the upper tolerance to be 2,000ths of an inch bigger, so I have a 3,000ths of an inch tolerance between the lower limit and the upper limit, I'll put in 0.002. Okay, let me highlight this, 0.002, and notice that it automatically adds that preceding, or that tolerance there. So now the smallest it can be is 0.499. The largest it can be is 0.502. Okay. Now at this point, I could go ahead and I could do that same thing for this. But if this is a tolerance that I use a lot, maybe that's a limits tolerance that you use a lot, what you'll want to do is go ahead and create another dimension style with that tolerance. So to do that, you would simply go to your dimension style manager and say, I want to create a new one, but this time I'm going to call it, say, in this case, I'll call it mechanical dash limits. Okay. And starting with mechanical and using it for all dimensions, continue. I can go to that tolerances page and I can say, okay, I want it to be a limits dimension. My lower will be 0.00, or my upper will be 0.002. My lower will be 0.001. I can change this to 3 places here. I can change on my units to 3 places here. And then say OK. And now I've created that mechanical limits dimension style. Now again, you don't want to use this for all dimensions, but rather than having to go through the process of selecting all the dimensions that I want to apply it to, now and doing the override process over and over again, now that it's there, I can simply just pick that dimension and then drop this down and choose the dimension style that I want it to have. Now, one other place that it's common to use an override is when you want to draw a leader through the center. So let's say I want to know the radius of this arc, but I want my leader to go through the center and up here. If I come up here and I use my dimension tool, I can put it down here, and that's not going to be a problem. Oops, let me change my dimension style back to mechanical. Okay. So if I do this again, I can say, okay, I want this. And I can do it down here, and that's no problem. But if I want that center line to go through here, as soon as I get to the other side of this circle, it creates that extension line. Okay, and that's not what I want. I just want this leader to go all the way through and then touch over here somewhere. So again, this is one that's probably just done best with an override. I wouldn't create a dimension style just for this because it's kind of a rare situation. But the way you fix this is you'll simply pick that dimension. Again, use your Change Properties dialog box. And you're going to go to Lines and Arrows. And then you're going to choose the one that says Extension Line. By default, it's on. You'll simply turn it off. And now notice that my extension line, my dimension line that is, the leader goes all the way through. So it goes through that point, and no matter which way I have this point, it goes all the way through there. So that's probably the easiest way to change that. Now, there's lots of other ways. I encourage you to go in and create your own dimension styles and experiment with it, because you can save a lot of time with your dimension style manager by creating substyles.